welcome to another episode of Growing Up B2B. I'm your host, Ed Delia. I'm the second generation of Delia Associates, the place where B2B brands go to grow. And I'm excited to introduce our guest today. He's Peter Culver, the co-founder and chief wealth strategist of Wealthrive. With over 25 years of experience in wealth management, Peter is responsible for building custom wealth plans for each client that realizes their goals and aligns with their values. Peter's passion is working directly with individuals and families to reach their personal and financial goals. He offers his clients deep experience in all facets of wealth management, financial and estate planning, investments and insurance, family dynamics, and wealth transfer. To this technical expertise, he adds the ability to see the big picture and integrate all the components into one cohesive plan. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So you've built a reputation by expertly navigating that complex intersection of family dynamics and wealth management. Can you share how you first discovered the power of blending financial strategies with family harmony?
Yeah, I would say beginning about 20 years ago, I started doing a fair amount of work. We worked at the same company at that time with a guy. You should probably have him on this podcast. His name is Tom Rogerson. He is one of the leading, thought leaders in the whole area of family governance.
Okay.
And he told me to read a book by a famous guy named Attorney Jay Hughes, who wrote a book, I think it's called Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family, something like that. And essentially, and that guy went on to write a series of books, but that specific book is about the all too common pattern of first generation makes the money, second generation spends the money, third generation wonders, now what are we going to do? Because there's no money left over. So sometimes that's referred to as shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations. And it's interesting. Part of what this guy, Jay Hughes, he got interested in the concept himself and actually quit practicing law and devoted all of his time and energy to this. And one of the things that interested him was, is that just a phenomenon in a developed country like the United States, or is it more common? And he explores in the book that, like, they have in India, they say rice paddy to rice paddy in three generations. And so it is not an uncommon pattern of families to not, unfortunately, do a great job at preserving their wealth. And so I got interested in the subject, and in part because the reason that the wealth dissipates is not because they don't have a good investment manager, or they don't have a good tax strategist, or they don't have a good insurance professional. It's all about communication and really non-financial dynamic in the family. And it would make sense to be interested in that subject if your job is to help people create wealth. You want them to learn how to preserve it. So it's been something that ever since then I've been interested in and trying to make sure families are aware of that dynamic and some of the things that they might do about it.
Understood. So in your work at Wealthrive, what specific challenges do high net worth family businesses frequently encounter? And of those, how do you help them overcome those challenges?
So I think they fit into two categories. The way we talk about our work at Wealthrive, and it's where the name comes from. So yes, we help clients invest their money. Our real skill is helping them reduce their taxes, help them with financial planning, estate planning. So those are all designed to increase the basic wealth on the balance sheet. But the $64 question is, to what end? Why are we doing that? And I think our observation is, when we start work with a client, we have them go through a couple of exercises, which we generally refer to the ideal life exercises. And so we ask them, Mr. and Mrs. Entrepreneur, it's 5 years from now, it's 10 years from now, whatever, looking into the future, paint us a picture of what your ideal life looks like. We've done hundreds of those. nobody, especially business owners, when they're telling you what their ideal life looks like, they don't talk about money. They talk about what they want to be doing, with whom, not with whom, where. So I think in general, whether we work with an individual client or a family, a multi-generational family, there's a quantitative component to what we do. So that's the investments, the taxes, the planning, the insurance, all
Mm,
that stuff. But in some ways, the real goal is that they have a qualitative result that they're happy about. And so that kind of keys into what would get in the way or be an obstacle. And I would say, I say this all the time, look, the money, the investments, the taxes, once you have the proper training experience, that's the easy part. The people are the hard part, right? I think what we try and do is, and having done it for a while, you're sensitized to recognizing a not good family dynamic.
mm,
If you're attuned to it, it can jump
yeah.
off the page. And
Mm,
I think what we try and do is educate our clients. And you're trying to grow your business, build it up, make it more valuable. But if you don't work on some of this other family dynamic, qualitative kind of stuff, it might be for no. That's conceptually, I think, a big obstacle. The good news is that most business owners, I think, are by nature lifelong learners, and they're always interested in learning about something new. And
yeah.
they may never have heard of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in three generations, but I think if they're in a family business, they usually have some desire to perpetuate it. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, so I'm second gen, and I was
Yep.
very early in the journey at Delia Associates. So my dad was still in the business, and
Okay.
I was out at a business meeting and I was sitting with a consultant. He said, most family businesses, there's an 85% failure rate from one generation to the next. I was like,
Correct.
thanks. I needed to hear
Yeah, exactly. Right.
that. Okay. Thanks for that. I don't know if it's quite that high, but maybe it is. And I've certainly heard various statistics, but you brought up a number of interesting points, Peter, namely about the fact that when it comes to what they want in terms of your initial assessment, it's not always all about the money. And I'm just wondering, are there any common strands there, people where things you hear a lot? Hey, they always reference maybe family unity or,
Yeah, I would say certainly that comes up. I think busy business owners get consumed by their business, and that doesn't leave time for these other
Mhm.
qualitative type components. And so that's why when you ask these questions, they don't say, I need another $10 million or I need my business to 5X or something like that. It's about where they want to be spending their time, how they want to be spending the time. One of a piece of the true north, that's what we call it, the true north questionnaire, has two columns in it. One is how you spend your time today, business, invest, family, fun and recreation, and stuff like that. And then the second column is what would that look like 5 or 10 years from now? And usually, what is the time devoted to the business goes down, and the time devoted to family and friends, recreation, those kinds of things goes up. And so, when we see that, I think we try and think about ways we can help facilitate that transition. I tell a
Mhm.
fun story where we have a client, he's a business owner. He's, as many business owners are, he's a workaholic. He doesn't have any kids, but it's still to the point we're talking about. So when we did this idea, one of the questions is, what's the top thing on your bucket list that you haven't been able to accomplish, but you would really love to accomplish? So this guy's thing was he wanted to learn how to fly an airplane so that he could fly solo. That was his
Okay.
nirvana. So in our work, which again, in his case, wasn't necessarily family work, but it was a lot of work around how his time was structured, delegating, all that kind of stuff. And to make a long story short, about 2 years, sorry, after we started working with him, he got his pilot's license and he was just like over the moon. That's not a monumental thing to do to get your pilot's license, but he felt like we had helped enable him to, and I think in the family context, what we're trying to do is if you read all these books, again, the reason money doesn't cascade from generation to generation and keep getting bigger and bigger is more about communication, family governance, family education. We always try to find out initially, what have you been doing to educate your kids, include them in the conversation, give them projects to do together. And often they're not doing that much. So you want to encourage them. One of the things that this guy, Jay Hughes, found is that in terms of family structure, the most common structure of family wealth that didn't continue was what we would call the traditional hierarchical dad, son, grandson, right? And
Yeah.
just it cascaded down that way. What it turns out is as a family expands, you want to start getting a horizontal communication. So if you have sons and daughters, you want to encourage them to work together and give them projects to work together. Maybe if you get to the third generation, you want to encourage all those, depending on how you look at it, grandkids or nieces and nephews to work together. And they're wonderful things. Philanthropy is a kind of great training ground for the next generation where they can learn about finance and investments and stuff like that. But before you give them the complete steering wheel for the business.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's how we address that.
So that kind of leads into my next question, and I think we've been kind of batting around it now, this whole idea of succession planning.
Sure.
I have some thoughts on it too, in terms of what I
I
look
bet.
for. But what are some of the pitfalls you've seen in terms of when it doesn't work out, and how do you guide families and protect them or proactively address, hey, here's a potential problem that's coming, and how do you avoid that pitfall?
Yeah. So my own view is that the most common problem there is that there is no succession plan. Back to my vertical thing.
Yeah.
Dad's going to die at the desk, and let's hope that Junior can take over, right?
Yeah.
You want to attack that. I'm from New England. You're from sort of New England, but often up here we will say, oh, estate planning is supposed to be a surprise. You find out what's happening when they read the will. So that is not a good recipe for success. So if we were working with a multi-generational family, once we'd gotten entrenched and had a good lay of the land, I think that would be something that we would start to take up with them. What do you have a plan? Do you know? And sometimes they may not have a plan in the sense of a formal plan, but they might have an idea. And then you're trying to, the succession plan is dad'll decide who's going to run the business. Not usually the best if there are multiple options. So I just think it's all about, there's no right answer. Every family is going to be different in terms of what the perfect, I think one thing that we do think is once, and if you have mature children that are at least capable of processing everything that's going on and you don't mind them knowing all the details, I think the best thing that promotes good succession planning is having regular family meeting and they're a little tense in the beginning because dad or mom, whoever the CEOs, they have to learn to step back a little bit and let the kids talk and things like that. But I think including, and that's partially, that's the education and the imparting knowledge, but it's also partially that horizontal conversation. You may be able to delegate projects that like your sons and daughters can work on together. That's probably going to be good in the long run to encourage that kind of collaboration. Again, philanthropy is a great thing for them to work on where it has almost all the same missions in the business. It's not the business. Training wheels, right? For those kind of kids. And I think if you were opening up the whole balance sheet in the business, you probably would want kids somewhat older. But we have some clients that do this kind of collaborative philanthropy with teenagers or college
Mhm.
kids, that kind of thing. I just think communication, passing along the knowledge of the older people, it's not necessarily guarantees success, but I think it improves your odds of success in that
That's
arena.
very, yeah, that's very interesting. And I imagine for some families, I can see how that might be uncomfortable.
It is in the beginning sometimes because
Yeah.
it's a
Not in a
little
bad
bit of
way,
a
just
role
in,
reversal.
yeah, but also depending on their attitudes or their maybe predispositions to how money and wealth is even talked about.
Agreed.
If it's talked about, to your point, you don't find out until
Right.
someone passes on what
Agreed.
was there or not there, or what's happening, or what state the affairs are left in. That's got to be some interesting. And so,
Yeah, and I think that you touched on another little point there, which would be applicable to anyone's plan. But fortunately, in the US, we have a system where you can write a will or a trust that says what you want to happen to your stuff, as long as
mhm,
it's not illegal. That is definitely better than not having a plan at all. And so while that's would seem to me to be common sense, that would be applicable to one's personal assets. You should have the same kind of plan for the business. And I think another thing that I think sometimes it's parents might think that she's the one. She just strikes us as the best one to run the business. Maybe she doesn't want to run the business. Or
exactly.
maybe if you tried her out, she might not turn. I've had many cases where the person who really turns out to be the right person is a sleeper. I'm going to think
I
of a
could see that.
family I've worked with, and they're up in the Rochester area, three sons. The father always favored the oldest son.
Mm,
Natural, no big deal. Then there was a middle son who really, this happens sometimes, just wasn't interested. Just, I don't want to be in the family business. You guys take care of it. I just want to do my own thing. And then it turned out that the youngest son was way more adept in many ways at running the business than the oldest son. And it was a little challenging to
yeah.
navigate that. But the way it came out was the dad offered everybody the opportunity to work in the business. The middle
Right.
son opted out. Fine, no big deal. Both the oldest son and the youngest son worked in the business. And it was the dad and everybody else, I think even the oldest son, to his chagrin, probably
Sure.
noticing if we want to make the smart decision for the business and therefore for the family, this younger son is the guy.
Yeah,
And I'm sure that was difficult at some levels, but
I'm sure.
they opened it up. They gave everybody a chance. I think that's,
Yeah.
you want to
Wow.
get a window into what it might look like. You got to have the right circumstances. In
Yeah.
that case, I think the dad probably started to do that opening up when he was 60. He was still at the company. He was vibrant. He could watch what was going on. He wasn't in a rocking chair or anything like that. And just over time. And
Yeah.
so,
What I've noticed both in my own journey as well as the others who have, I think when the exposure is early and often at very young ages. My first exposures to Leo Associates, I was like, my first memories, I was like 4 or 5 years old, right?
yeah,
So the exposure is early and often that I think elevates you the chance of that next generation succeeding because you've seen so much. And I think we take for granted how much we learn simply by observation,
100%.
by watching the older generation do their thing. I think success and growth then happens when that next generation has a vision of their own. And
Right.
doing it 10% better than my dad or mom isn't a vision. They have to
Yeah,
really,
of course.
because, by virtue of the generational shift, the industry changed,
Oh,
customers
sure.
probably changed, technology has changed. So
Tremendous.
for the
Did
business
your
to just
mom
kind
work
of
in the business too?
actually ancillarily, but my grandmother was the first bookkeeper.
Oh, okay, cool. Very
And
cool.
and I have three older siblings all that did some time in the business. And to your
Yep.
earlier point, Peter, they basically he said, I've got a different vision, I've got a different path. And it wasn't Delia Associates. I
Okay.
came along as the youngest by 10 years and was crazy enough to say, yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to buy the business.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
but here we are heading in now in year 61, and I've been here
Oh, wow.
coming up on my 30th year.
Oh, wow. Very
I think we're
cool.
doing okay.
Like
But
it.
yeah, getting back to something else I started to touch on, but
Yep.
obviously being deeply involved in wealth coaching and wealth management, what are some misconceptions that the clients you work with may have about interacting with a person like yourself? What are some things that you have to set the record straight when you come to the table?
Yeah, so I think, and maybe it's because we work in the wealth management business, but we're entrepreneurs ourselves. So I think there's a lot of the wealth management business, regrettably, where clients pay fees for certain activities and they're not sure if they're getting any return on their investment, right? I pay somebody or some group of percent to manage my money, but every year it just matches the market, right? Is
Yeah.
there value added there? I think we're not perfect, but we try and stay focused on activities that really add value in the client's lives, whether that's
Mhm.
the quantitative part, and probably there, that's not the reason we ended up having such a heavy focus on it, but probably in the quantitative area, the area that we focus the most on is taxes. So
Mhm.
if we can show someone how to implement a strategy or a structure that reduces their taxes, the result is super quantifiable. It's pretty immediate. It can
Mhm.
occur every year. So I think it's easy for a client to see. So that's, I think, having clients trust the fact that you are trying to give them a real return on their investment. I would say the other thing is that most clients, in their mind, don't engage with financial advisors to buy products, whether that be investment management or life
Mhm.
insurance or whatever it is. They're looking for an advisor, a guide, a pathfinder, whatever you want. And in some ways, a partner. They want someone who is really on their side of the table, helping them navigate all these products and services. That's just our business orientation. We're, I don't know, an ombudsman with our clients for all these things and try and help them figure that out. So when I know you mentioned my co-founder Noah is somebody that you know, and one of I think the things that attracted us to each other is we've always both been in our financial services careers extremely responsive to clients. That's just one of our trademarks. I think that's client focused, not advisor focused.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what you always want to, I think. And I think a lot of people rightly, they come into this world with skepticism, fear, and it takes time to earn their trust, no doubt about it. It's not automatic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we work on that pretty hard.
See. So a lot of times, um, the companies, and especially the ones I've had on this show, they have a hard time with boundaries. So
Yep.
whether it's, is this a business issue? Is this a family issue? And what we often see is they're cascading. And so suddenly we're at the dinner table, we're talking business, or we're in the middle of a
Right.
board meeting and we're talking about some sort of a family dynamic going on in the background. To what extent would you guide or advise a client when you see that happening in maybe a less than healthy or organized way as to how to manage that or mitigate that a bit?
Yeah, I think the one trick there is if you're in a family business, by definition, it is a little hard to separate family from business, right?
Sure.
Now, we do a lot of family meetings. We have some ground rules that we tell everybody at the beginning of the meeting, right? So don't talk over people, be respectful. But I like to use a phrase which I call do no harm. This is not a political contest. This is not whatever you want to call it. These are your family members. So you have to think about what you're going to say because stuff can jump out of your mouth that's hard to retrieve
Yeah.
if it's damaging.
Yeah.
And so I think when it starts to, I think there are those two different things. There's some stuff that's just about business and maybe isn't
Mhm.
about family and vice versa. But in other, you could say family business succession planning. That's about the business and that's about the family. It's hard to pull those two apart. I think you just have to keep it at a professional, respectful level. And I think sometimes it's hard for families to do that themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I can see the value of your presence being the facilitator and maybe at times the referee. I don't know if you've ever had any
Sometimes, oh,
situations.
no, yeah. I'm trying to think. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's similar. So we have two clients right now, two business owners on Long Island. Let's say one is 65, one is 45. So the
Mhm.
65-year guy is transitioning out, and we're trying to negotiate a buyout. Surprise. To start with, they each have in their mind a different idea of the buyout, right? And
Sure.
the guy who's leaving, the seller thinks that it's not enough, and the guy who's the buyer who's staying thinks it's too much. And they got into a little bit of a little kind of a tiff kind of thing. And I think it was good. We've been involved right from the beginning to try and perform that facilitator intermediary
Mhm.
role. And I guess I'm old enough and strong enough, but we could say to them, guys, you got to cut the crap here, right? We're
Yeah.
this if we're going to have a success, and I repeated that thing about do no harm, right?
Great point.
They've
Yeah.
worked together for 20 years. It's not like they're just going to give the guy who's leaving a check and he's going to leave and close the door and never talk to you again. You're going to have an ongoing relationship. It should be constructive. The trick is that a lot of what we're talking about is common sense or normal, but in families, the emotional baggage can really get in the way.
Yeah,
And
you're
sometimes
talking
what you
to
have to
an,
do
I'm
is
an Italian family, so a bunch of Italians getting together. That's a lot of crazy passion going on in one room. So
and I think sometimes all families are different, but sometimes inside the family or one or more family members, there's some kind of anger or resentment.
sure.
And for whatever reason, it's never been gotten out in the open, right? It festers and then it goes dormant for a while and then something happens and it pops up again. So I think sometimes what a good facilitator can do is I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but the words I don't think are really what's going on here. What's driving your emotion or your anger? And
Mm,
if we're going to make progress here together, you need to share that with people. Sometimes those sessions can be pretty emotional.
yeah, I bet. I bet.
Because if kids with strong parents, those parents don't necessarily tend to encourage all kinds of open emotional communication. So it builds up and somehow you got to break that down.
So when you look at some of the high net worth families that have been able to successfully preserve wealth across multiple generations, what's a key takeaway or surprising lesson you've learned in your journey of working with these types of individuals? What's a good takeaway
Yeah.
or a lesson learned in
And
that?
again, I'll use my bifurcation of quantitative versus qualitative. So in our work, as I've mentioned, our probably key technical, we do all the stuff, investment management, financial planning, but probably the area where we move the needle the most is helping people reduce their tax liability. And I would say most people don't realize how powerful it can be not to pay taxes. And we show them, and we've all heard about compounding, right? But if you can compound money that you didn't pay taxes on, which is probably anywhere from 25 to 50%, depending upon the type of the income, the state you live in, when you show someone that progression of money compounding without paying tax in comparison to money with tax, it's a phenomenal. So that's some technical stuff. And then we would help them implement all of that. And then I would say on the qualitative side, open communication, involving the next generation, getting sons and daughters and grandchildren working together. And I think maybe it sounds Pollyannish, but in families that are successful that way, there's just an ongoing, I don't know, reservoir of goodwill, right?
Okay.
Maybe a little hard to put your finger on how you create that, but it's got to start with the first generation, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So in addition to, so certainly success in terms of engagements that you have with clients, the quantitative measure is
yeah,
financial outcomes. But to
sure.
what extent do you often put some measurement or metric or outcome around, say, relational harmony or the softer side, the emotional side of the equation?
Yeah, I think a lot. And it's interesting. I'm thinking of a little bit of an amendment we might. So when I talk about this concept of ideal life, it tends to be more about mom and dad, right? Hey, Bob and Susan, where do you want your life to look like in 5 or 10 years? And right now, we don't explicitly say, and hey, what about your kids? How do you feel about your
Yeah.
family? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There is that module, the ideal life thing, has two parts. One is an exercise called True North, and the idea is it's a little silly, but if your heart had a compass, where would it point? It probably doesn't point back to the office. It probably doesn't point to your balance sheet. It points to, in the larger sense, what you want your life to look like. We don't expressly ask there about the kids. There is a second part, which is called the wheel of life. And
Mhm.
imagine a pizza pie. I forget whether it has 6 or 8 slices, and the slices are fun and recreation, finance,
Mhm.
physical environment, romance, and one is like family and friends. And the way it works is on a scale of 1 to 10, you rate where you think you are today in each of those areas. And the goal of that exercise is to try and help them express what are areas that they feel like they'd feel better if instead of the number being a 5, it was a 9 or something
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
So I'm enjoying this because I think we could be a little bit more overt about trying to extract from them at the beginning, what about your family? How,
Mm.
what's going on there? Is that working? What would you change there? And
Yeah.
people
Yeah. For sure.
we're usually pretty good at getting people to talk about stuff.
Another question, and this, so I was at the crossroads at the age of 22, and different multi-gens are at the crossroad at different ages. But if you could offer one piece of advice to a younger generation that's considering a role in the family business or even stepping into a future leadership role in the family business, what might you say to that young person, whether they're in their 20s or maybe early 30s, who is saying, do
Yeah,
I do this? Do I not do this? How might you guide
I
them?
think a couple of things. One, in some ways, going to work right away in the family business isn't always the best training to be
Mhm.
successful in the family business, right? It could be that ultimately the way to make the most contribution is whatever it is, become a lawyer, become an accountant, go to business school, that kind of thing. If you were clever about that and strategic about that, you'd either try and figure out yourself, or I would even recommend, hey, dad, hey, mom, hey, whoever's looking in the business, I'm really interested in being in the business long run. I'm not sure I'm ready right now. I'm not even sure I want to do that right now. But if
Yeah.
you were thinking about the business in the future, what's an area that you'd like to improve in the family business? And that might be something I could make myself better at. And there usually is. They don't
Mhm.
have a person who does social media marketing inside. So that would be, if they're not doing
Yeah.
any of that, would be a cool thing to do. Or they have Betty the bookkeeper, but maybe what they really need is a CFO at some point if they're going to grow the business. So I think, and I think it would be a mistake, I think, if you're interested to convey the impression that you're entitled. That's not going to go over well, is
Yeah.
make it known that you're interested. And then think about it. If you were just trying to get a job anywhere, one of the questions you might ask if you were being clever is, okay, here in this company, what are the biggest areas of need where I might be able to make a contribution?
Hmm.
So I think and I would say that there's offense and defense. That's the offensive part of it. The defensive part of it is, what if it doesn't work out? If the
Hmm.
only thing you know how to do is what you learned at the company, that might not be and any bad stuff could
Yeah.
happen. The company could get bought by another company, whatever it is. So I think develop your own skill base in addition to just the day you get your diploma walking in and starting working at the company. Sometimes that works out fabulously well, but I think that would be my recommendation.
That's a great recommendation, by the way. And I often look back in my own journey and wish that I had that opportunity because I think my situation was different. It was a heart to heart with dad. And he said, think it over, but don't think too long because either you buy it or I'm selling it. And he had some suitors lined
Oh,
up
okay.
to,
So
to sell it. So I had to
that's
say,
different.
yes, I have to. I was 22 years old. And I said, I think I'd be foolish to pass up on an opportunity
Agreed.
to do this. However,
Do you have
you
any
know,
siblings in your family?
yeah, there's three siblings.
And how has that all worked out in your family case in that did any of the rest of them work in the business?
For a time, they all did,
Okay.
as well as an uncle, grandma,
Okay.
cousin,
Yep.
in-laws. Yeah, so there's been a lot of family activity over the years, but none of them said, "Yeah, I want to do this long term," or "I want to take this over." And then I came along. Anyway, the but you're absolutely right, Peter. That's some really tremendous advice. Last question, and this has been great. If any of our listeners wanted to get in touch with
Oh,
you
sure.
and learn more about what you do at Wealthrive or have a conversation with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So a couple. One, we have a website, wealthrive.com. Almost come to the point where I think websites are passe these days, but we do have one. There's a fair amount of learning material there. What I often recommend is I have I guess what you'd call a personal URL, which is Thrive, the word Thrive, like Thrive, beyond taxes. So save money on taxes, but that's not the only reason to do it. The reason is to have a thriving life. So it's just
Mhm.
thrivebeyondtaxes.com. There's a very simple little kind of an intake form. What's your name? And then they
Mhm.
can indicate if they had a particular interest. Hey, I like what you said about family governance. Could we have
Mhm.
a chat about that? I was interested in what you said about taxes. Maybe we could
Mhm.
talk about that. The other thing that they'll see is on the website is Noah and I together have written 4 or 5 books, ebooks, things like that about the topics we've been talking about today. And
Awesome.
we're always I think we're lifelong learners. We like educating people, even if it means nobody ever does business with us. And people say that the material that we've written is pretty decent. Some of it's technical and some of it is more on these family governance type topics.
Mhm.
And love to chat with anybody further about these topics if they have interest.
Awesome. Awesome. Well,
Cool.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. Again,
Pleasure.
we've been speaking with Peter Culver, co-founder and chief wealth strategist of Wealthrive, and I'm your host, Ed Delia. Thanks so much for joining us here at Growing Up B2B and have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Peter. So great to have you on.
Pleasure, my friend. Thank you. Real good.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into Growing Up B2B. To explore more episodes and insights, visit podcast.delianet.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Having worked with hundreds of family-led businesses across my career, and being a second-generation leader myself, I'm on a mission to help every family business I meet achieve next-level growth for their organization. So feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's support each other. You can also find out more about my company at delianet.com. Again, I'm your host, Ed Delia, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.